Good morning or afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the first panel discussion. The session is going to be about 40 minutes long. And this discussion is going to be on establishing common goals and common ground on squaring the public-private sector relationship. So I'd like to introduce to you Karl Gutbrod. He's the CEO of meteoblue in Switzerland. And then I'll leave Karl just to introduce the rest of the panelists, but he's going to be moderating this session and taking it from here. So Karl, I'll hand over to you to take over the session, and when you're finished at the end, I'll jump in and just sort of announce the next step in the process. But welcome, Karl.
Thanks, Luke. Thanks, fellow panelists. Thanks, attendees in the session. We have 35 minutes to try to get a handle on the entire weather value chain, which is a major and very fundamental part of many countries and value chains and supply chains and society. And so we'll try to get a handle on this value chain by making a few statements and then trying to look into the future and get the view on the India situation from the different panelists. So I'd like to start this off by putting up 5 steps of the weather value chain for the discussion. The first one is the instrumentation part, which is actually characterized by a number of suppliers who provide instrumentation and observation and measurement networks all around the globe with a multitude of technologies. The second one is then the setting up and operating of networks, which measures and tracks weather over areas and time, which permits us actually to capture the events which are happening. The third is the data management level, capturing and processing all these data. The fourth is the presentation level, which is actually making these data available to companies, to organizations, society. And the fifth is what we call the service delivery and distribution channel, which is actually packaging these data and images to a multitude of different downstream channels. And I just mentioned energy, business, tourism, air traffic, shipping, logistics, and agriculture as some of the featured channels which need very defined and customized packages. So we'll try to get a handle on these 5 steps of the value chain. And the first handle I'd like to get on it is from Jim Anderson. He's Director of International Sales of Earth Networks, one of the major private US weather players situated on operating on various steps of these value chains, from the instrumentation part all the down to the service delivery part. He's also chairman of HMEI, the largest international organization representing private meteorology technology providers, and he has got more than 20 years of industry experience in many countries of the world. So he certainly has a profound, broad, and future-looking view on this chain. I'd like Jim to give us some comments on where he sees this value chain developing in the next 10 years.
Thank you, Karl. And also I want to try to put this into the context for India as best we can, and perhaps it's what changes or what's the path forward with the value chain, as you put it, to help foster better public-private engagement. And we can think about that in the context of India as well. Certainly in India today, the private sector and the public sector are involved really at every step of the value chain, as you describe it, in providing, end products and services to different segments, different customer segments. And if there's a challenge to doing that in a faster, more effective way. And it'd be interesting to hear what other panelists and what the audience hears about this, is that within India, sometimes it's not clear what the respective roles of the public and private sector are, or how they're going to collaborate, or what their agreed upon way of collaborating is in different stages of the value chain. So it's important, I think, and this isn't just true in India, it's true in many countries where it's not necessarily clear what is that sort of either customary or legal, regulatory, or other type of framework that sort of establishes the free, fair, and open collaboration of the different segments of the weather enterprise in the different components of the value chain. And where and when are different sectors going to play the biggest role, or what roles are they going to play in each segment of the value chain? Whether that's not just private sector, public sector, but also academia, the donor-funded community, and other very valuable and important components of the overall weather enterprise. So certainly our company, has been involved in and have been working with customers in India for nearly a decade, both with government entities, commercial entities, different at the national level, regional level, local level within India. And so you see that challenge where it's not necessarily clear what the role of each entity should be. And are we doing the right thing? Are we doing it in a way that's harmonious with, and in collaboration with the public sector in all of those areas? And certainly it's important to try to find that balance. And to the extent that clarity can be provided within the weather enterprise within India, and the more clarity, the more openness and transparency that there can be, then that's going to help foster the hydrometeorological industry within India. I think that's it, Karl. Back to you.
I mean, this raises some fundamental questions on what the different roles should be. And before diving into those and getting the questions from the audience, I'd like to maybe ask Sanjay to comment on some fundamental tests of the value chain, which is related to disaster warning. And Sanjay comes from UNESCAP, Economic Social Commission for Asia and Pacific, and which unites 53 member states, has also been active in the weather business, including the India weather business for several decades, and is promoting disaster recovery projects, amongst others, which is one of the examples where the public and private sector necessarily have to cooperate, because it goes all the way from good and better instrumentation to network operation, data management, very rapid data delivery, and reaching the last mile, so to speak, user for the respective warnings. So Sanjay, maybe could you put some light from your perspective on what the role of the private and the public and the private sector are in these disaster, let's say, prevention and recovery projects?
Yeah. Thank you, Karl. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and thank you, James and colleagues. I think the articulation on the value chain for the weather services, weather and climate services, nobody will disagree. It's very well articulated. Let me share with you from disaster management perspective, and particularly from the multi-hazard early warning system, because their value chain are very critical. It's related to the saving lives perspective. So many governments, including India, attaches the highest priority to the value addition to weather and climate services. So particularly for multi-hazard early warning system. I would like to flag up, particularly all of you may be aware, there is a paradigm shift in weather and climate services from just providing weather related information to moving to the impact forecasting. And the moment you say impact forecasting, it requires a lot of value to the data, which are basically mostly from the meteorological platforms or coming from many other sources. So that data has to be, there are great deal of value addition required when it comes to impact-based forecasting or risk-informed early warning system. For example, if the data that comes from the simple Met platform is what is the speed of a tropical cyclone, its landfall, its tracks, its intensity, but those are mostly the technical information, landfall, intensity, and tracks. But what is really required down the line, and wherever there are successes, I'm seeing worldwide and particularly in Asia and also in India, is the moment you convert this in form of an impact, like the population which are going to be impacted are on the cyclone tracks. Who are those people? So whether you have a population data, nowadays the gridded population data are available in digital domain. So you must know the people who are on exposed to the cyclone tracks. And they are the people who need to be evacuated to save their lives. So that's a very actionable information. And that is the impact on the community. So if the early warning system is associated with the impact on the potential population who are going to be affected by the cyclone, it makes a lot of difference in overall particularly in reducing the disaster impact at community level. Same is impact on multiple sectors, impact on, let us say, on the critical infrastructure, impact on some of the livelihoods sector, like for example, agriculture. If I remember correctly, in India 2013, there was a cyclone Hudhud, and it is considered as one of the best case from India's perspective because the lives saved was very substantial. Everybody applauded. But the real lesson was the economic impact of cyclone Hudhud was huge. There was a new airport that was built, and the total losses were around, if I remember correctly, around $18 billion because it impacted a city called Vizag, Visakhapatnam, and there was the airport, there was a naval establishments, many things. So the what could be the potential impact on critical infrastructure, which has a huge economic implications. Those are the things now new demand. So suppose if we do in our value chain analysis, the data that we were talking about, the quality of data, the data which brings value in terms of the impact, the community, those who are mostly at the risk, who need to be evacuated, it makes a lot of sense for government to spend, especially to invest in the private sector, which can help government to develop this kind of value. I'm in my capacity as a Chief of Disaster Risk Program of UNESCAP. I have been collaborating with many governments of Typhoon Committee, which is basically Hong Kong, China, Japan, Korea, and the Macau, the Vietnam. Those are the typhoon belt. And private sectors, particularly in terms of the value addition on impact forecasting, are doing great jobs because those are all smart technology. It requires big data. It requires a lot of modeling. And that is something which makes your forecast actionable down the line. So I see a great prospect for the value chain, particularly in multi-hazard early warning system. what I shared with you is an example of cyclone. There are similar in case of floods. I see Japan, China, they have all impact-based flood forecasting, and it is making a lot of, I think, positive impact from the early warning system, what we call second generation early warning system product. So if we think from like what WMO says, what instead of moving away from what weather will do to what weather will impact, or what to what extent it will impact on the people, I think that will be a real value chain, and I can see a lot of role of the private sectors in those areas. Thank you.
So Sanjay,
Yes.
Sorry to follow up on this, because you've already spoken, but let's go to two critical issues in this regard. First of all, I mean, it's obviously the public sector who must decide whether to displace people or how to inform the public, the mass public. So that's understood. Now let's take the scenario. One private sector has better forecasting models or technology. How would we deal with two alternative warnings, one coming from a private company and the second coming from the public? That's one issue in this space. The second issue I'd like you to flag or perhaps comment on is that public sector or consortium of players issue warnings. What's the role in the private sector to more effective delivery of those warnings to the stakeholders concerned?
Yeah, if allow me to speak very frankly on this issue, because the authoritative sources of early warning, particularly in different countries, most of the country I know, they believe there could be many warning, but the action that any government takes to evacuate people, to do all kind of preparedness measure, they go by their own early warning system. So they feel it's like their sovereign right, it's the authoritative information. So the best example, if I would like to quote, I saw in case of Vietnam, and about 5-6 years back, it was the weather services in Vietnam were not doing very well, but they had many partnership at private level. Many Japanese companies worked with them, many Hong Kong based companies worked with them, and they worked with them to strengthen their modeling capacity, the data assimilation capacity, and then the situation started changing. So it became a very good public-private partnership model, because every government is a bit sensitive on the authoritative sources of the early warning system. So if you work with government, enhance their capacity, so that will be like a win-win situation. And I think that I have seen in case of typhoon, it's working very well. In Hong Kong government, we saw, Macau, we saw private sectors join hand with the government, because modeling capacity, which I spoke to you on impact forecasting, risk inform, is a big analytics, which government has a very limited capacity to deliver on those technologies. So this is one area where private sector can play a really game-changing impact.
Very, very nice. And would you like to comment on the second question on what role the private sector may have in delivery of the warnings to different stakeholder or communities or downstream channels?
I think I have seen two models. One is, of course, they are part of the government mechanisms or part of NGO mechanisms. So it's a private sector in different countries. They have a different, I think, modalities. The country where there are very active non-government organizations, for example, International Red Cross Society, Nutrition Society, they collaborate with private sector. So they deliver these warning services with government and with non-government organization, especially some of the like a Red Cross Society, which are very credible on the ground.
Okay.
Right.
Do you see a role of the media as well?
Yes, yes, because media only take the end products. Means yeah, they amplify. If you have a early warning products, media scale it up. It takes to the people, means it's like a last mile connectivity. But the technical content has to come from, from the government, from the private, from the technology-based companies.
This consortium of
Yes,
let's say, cooperative effort to
Right,
produce
right.
the best possible early warning impact-based forecast, right?
Right.
Thank you very much, Sanjay. That was very elucidating on with a few best practice examples. We tried to get a view on now on the India perspective from Jatin Singh, the director of Skymet, weather services in India, one of the first private, if not the first private weather provider in India, and leading one with almost 20 years of experience in the private business. India being a market with a very strong public sector and perhaps a developing private sector. Jatin, would you like to give us a view on the India perspective, perhaps on the opportunities for development of private sector and public-private sector cooperation in one of the largest continents of this world called India?
Thank you, Karl. Thanks for the opportunity. It's great to be here. Jim is here. He knows the India story inside out. I mean, he's a pioneer, and I should thank Earth Networks, especially for doing a lot of good to India and the Indian people. They have saved thousands of lives by giving away their data absolutely free of cost in partnership with Skymet. And I acknowledge that publicly, and I think we should talk more about it. That said, see, India, you need to understand two things. You need to understand that the public scientific temperament is very difficult. They think the private sector has no reason to exist. That is the battle that I fight. Let alone collaborate, let alone contribute. When here, I think is the National Meteorological Service. In my case, it's the IMD. The second thing is that the world is changing very fast. You see, what changed everything in terms of weather information was the internet, because before the internet, the IMD was the sole organization that could generate any data or gave any forecast of any quality, and you had no access. Could you even imagine that you had a right to question or compete? So that from 2000 onwards started changing rapidly, and weather.com, AccuWeather, they came in and said, there are weather forecasts. They could see satellite images. There is, or you could see how the United States does the weather, and there's such a thing as Doppler weather radars. So I think the last, I've been in the business for about 17 years, is first creating a mind space that there are forces beyond the IMD that can do this and probably do it better. And then creating customers within the country that will take these services and pay for them. And unfortunately in India, India is a federated environment. That's very important to understand. So when I say government collectively at almost 3 levels: central, state, and local, which can work in completely cross purposes from each other. It's a democracy, right? So it doesn't matter how you say things differently.
We're a little familiar with that in America,
private
John.
business, and I think okay, and now
and sometimes not working so well too.
Yeah. So
we all have our challenges.
So that is actually a good thing, and that actually goes into the nature of the political system. So for Jim and for us, our major patrons have been the state governments, who forever were not very happy with the central services. Now, what happens is, as we started doing things, as we started bringing out our forecast, the IMD became competitive and became very good at what they do. Very, very good, actually. I have to compliment them. Their instrumentation became better. Their presentation became better. Their communications actually became better. But still, I would say it is a competitive environment. Still, I should also add that there are literally next to no private sector customers in the weather business in this country. I've worked for television in India. I worked for energy in India. I worked for all sorts of people. That market is minuscule. So and in terms of pure business, because I don't come from a governmental organization, there is still a greater opportunity in terms of revenues and instrumentation than in a data feed. I do a combination of both. But I think in India, because instrumentation builds the base over which forecasts are delivered over a generation. So like Earth Networks has demonstrated, for us also, our single biggest revenue is actually instrumentation. We have 6,500, 7,000 systems, automatic weather stations in this country, and with Earth Networks we worked for lightning, and now we do agriculture instrumentation also. And there is a better acceptance of procurement of instrumentation as opposed to data services. The Kerala state government contract that has been given out to us, to Earth Networks and IBM in the last week or so, is a game changer, although it's of small value, because here the state government, in a very public quarrel with the meteorological department of this country, has given a forecasting contract out to 3 private entities. So so it is a frictional environment right now, and I think the game is in building the infrastructure over the next 4 to 5 years before it actually turns into a data game.
Yeah, so thank you, Jatin, for this view. I mean, it's a mixed message, isn't it? It's yes, there is some opportunity, but yes, it's very difficult. So can we try to, from the panelists, get a view of what the way forward is? Because if it is difficult, it's either because it doesn't work, which is not what Sanjay was saying, because there is opportunity for cooperation, or because the opportunities of cooperation are not well enough understood yet by all the players, so they resist to change. And to make this a little bit easier, perhaps I'd like to start with a comment on the poll I started on the beginning. Is the cake going to increase a lot, or is it going to stay the same size? Because an increasing cake is easier to be divided than a cake which stays the same size, where everybody fights for their share and tries to get some more from the rest. So maybe Jatin and the others would like to comment on what you see, how you see the value of the weather business developing in the next 10 years.
I think the cake is definitely going to expand, but the fact that I like to understand what perspectives are there from people who work in India, that India is so difficult that the cake will belong to a couple of people only. And that is because it just takes so much time, to an unreasonable amount of time. I think if you work in India, it comes with a very special mental orientation that you can only understand when you're here. So that's my perspective.
So maybe we can, Jim, could you provide some views from other countries where liberalization, if you want to call it, or cooperation has actually increased the total value of the value chain and increased benefits to all stakeholders of society? Because this could be a role model for countries like India to follow, wouldn't it?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, when you mentioned liberalization, but I think is even more important than sort of picking which sort of end of the spectrum that you're on. And Jatin really points this out, that there's a challenge if you don't have clarity, if you don't have openness and transparency, and that's that you end up stifling public-private engagement. You end up stifling the development of the private sector, the adoption of new technology that could have a really positive impact on life and property and economic development. And I know we're going to get into that in some later presentations today. So it's really important that you have clarity. And there are some countries, I think, in the world where you have pretty solid agreement between the public and private sector and what respective roles they play. For example, in Japan, and I think Sanjay pointed out actually a couple of good examples in Asia, Southeast Asia, where you have good collaboration between the public and private sector, because you have that clear understanding of the respective roles of the public and private sector and other components of the weather enterprise and how they're going to interact. And actually, since the 80s within the US, there's been a pretty clear understanding. Since the the Fair Weather Act, you know, and that really created an opening where both the public and private sector were able to gain from that. And so, for example, we have, you know, a great example of it in the U.S. is the National Mesonet program, which is really a collaboration between the public and private sector, where the public sector, you know, needs and wants to have, you know, much more weather observations to drive its weather forecast models and other situational awareness for the weather forecast offices. But they know they want to be able to get those weather observations at a low cost and from as many sources as possible. So they created the National Mesonet program to bring together private sources of data for the public interest and use those within the public. So that's one example of how you can do that as well. But it requires, again, you know, transparency and openness and a clear understanding of what their respective roles and responsibilities of the public and private sector are. So then there's trust and everybody can come together around that.
So Jim, if you can just expand on that. So obviously it works in the US. Could you maybe comment whether that has led to a reduction of the National Weather Service's budget or actually?
Oh, no. Yeah, no. No, because, you know, what you end up with is sort of this virtuous cycle where, you know, you have the private sector, you know, and I'll probably, you know, I'll hope or disagree a little bit with what one thing Jatin said about, you know, the Indian market being dominated by just a couple of commercial weather companies. I think, you know, ultimately what makes it go is if you've got a large number of vibrant private sector, those companies, you know, moving into to service, you know, difficult components of the market, providing specialized services that can really help different types of enterprises and government agencies. And so that can be really important. And then, for example, in the US, you know, the private sector is one of the biggest advocates for the public sector, you know, and the public sector having, at all levels, having sufficient budget to acquire the meteorological products and services it needs, usually from the private sector, so that they can do their job. So we're, you know, I know, you know, as a participant in the National Mesonet program, for example, we are on a regular basis, you know, coming together as the industry to advocate for the government entities that use that data to have more budget for it. And so, and this happens in many different components of the value chain and different technologies, with different companies. So when this is working well, as Jatin said, the pie is getting bigger, and it's getting bigger rapidly because you have more and more constituents. You have the private sector coming together with the public sector to advocate for the needs of meteorological and hydrometeorological products and services that benefit enterprise and the general public at large, and help foster economic growth and human thriving within India. So that's why you need all sectors of the weather enterprise working together towards this in a cooperative way.
So the message is there is a virtual cycle and it's a win-win.
Absolutely. It's
a win-win.
Unequivocally.
And
yes.
I guess to shed the light on the next couple of days, one of the tasks or challenges or opportunities of this workshop, of this meeting, will be to identify these cooperation opportunities, if I may sort of throw the ball already to the next sessions. But still in this session, there has been a question from the audience regarding strategic technology framework for the better connectivity to reach the to sort of connect the automatic sensors, gadgets, real-time repositories, and the last mile. So is there anything you'd like to comment on, perhaps Jatin or Sanjay or to that, what you see in terms of strategic technology framework, connecting sensors, gadgets, real-time repositories for climate or weather related information processing?
I think in India that will, okay, I'm kind of skeptical. I don't think that in India that will ever happen. I'll tell you why. They're all working for a state government or working for a policy or working for solving a particular problem. Now, the problem is that the IMD does not acknowledge or rate the existence of these networks of any value. It can never come into a national framework. Now, so say Earth Networks and Skymet work together and putting a lot of data is given away free. It's available on our websites, it's available on our apps. There has been a discussion in the Ministry of Agriculture for at least 8 years that I can think of, that I've been active with the IMD being the nodal agency that is the recipient of a lot of the private data and creating a framework in which it is made available for national weather forecasting, which it should be, because directly or indirectly, if a state government is paying for a service or the Minister of Agriculture is paying for a service, it's a taxpayer's money. So it's not that the private sector is going to double charge for it. But that mental block, in the IMD, I think it's going to take some kind of serious political acknowledgement on the top that, this has to be done to happen. And I don't see that happening at least in the next 2 to 3 years at least.
Well,
that's how they think.
Let's be optimistic and hope that this meeting and our conversations will inject some light into this future path. This is one of the goals of our meeting and roundtable today. I guess we have to draw it to a closure because the time is up in 2 minutes.
Yeah.
I'd like to try to summarize a little bit from your perspective and on a positive note that there is opportunities which are very evident from Sanjay's. Sanjay, you have a comment? Yep, please.
Can I take 30 seconds? I came from Indian Space Research Organization. I spent 25 years there. And I must tell you, things are changing very fast. Space was only government business. And we were building satellite, we were building rocket, we were developing all kind of image products which were used by the government. Now, all of a sudden, government has taken a bold decision to privatize it, bring private sectors. They can use this government space facility, build their own satellites and rockets. So I'm a bit optimistic from that point of view that things are changing. It cannot be monopolized by government alone. I can see in space sectors, see in defense sectors, you need some kind of advocacy to build this case, a economic case for it, the real value chain, what we were talking about to it. So it may happen. I never imagined in my lifetime ISRO can become a private sector, a space enterprise will become private sector, but this is a reality now. It has really become private sector, and I can see the same future for the weather services as well. Thank you.
Well, thanks Sanjay and Jatin from the inside. I mean, we hope that with some of the examples brought, the path may become easy. The attraction of cooperation may become more rewarding. That the path may become more clear, and that this meeting and the future discussions will contribute to that. I think we have networking and other opportunities to follow up on this, and the speakers are, of course, available for further contact. I'd like to thank you all for this contribution. Thanks for the question from the audience, and ask Luke to wrap this up.
Sure. Thank you, Karl. And thank you all the other speakers as well. I think that was really informative.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jatin. Yeah, I certainly hope everyone took a lot of good value from that. As Karl said, you can reach out directly to the speakers if you want to take this any further. They're all extremely knowledgeable in their field, so please feel free to do that.